It's interesting hearing you talk about it. I mean, obviously you are an intellectual, and you seem to be dealing with it in an intellectual way. I mean, does that make sense? I mean, you seem to be looking at this, trying to look at this as rationally as possible. What about the emotional side?
Well, let's say as objectively as possible.
Objectively,
yes. And I mean, slightly to my own surprise, because I'm not by any means tear-proof. I haven't wept at any point yet. Maybe that's to come. But I've become moist when I think about my children, for whom it's a nasty shock. Incidentally, whatever God is punishing me, according to the other prayer faction, is punishing them too. I don't know if they think about that.
Just one more thing on the prayer group thing. Do you appreciate the gesture?
Oh yes, yeah, and often it comes from people who I've had debates with in the past on religion, in their churches or in their synagogues. People who've found me a very fierce antagonist and think that in some way, some bits of me anyway, are worth saving. So no, I take that kindly, of course. No, I wouldn't want to be churlish about any expression of concern, but I think I probably can't keep the slightly pitying tone out of my voice that anyone would think that the natural order, containing as much mystery and immensity as it does, could be altered by incantation.
In Vanity Fair, you wrote, I am badly oppressed by a gnawing sense of waste. I had real plans for my next decade and felt I'd worked hard enough to earn it. Will I really not live to see my children married, to watch the World Trade Center rise again, to read, if not indeed write, the obituaries of elderly villains like Henry Kissinger and Joseph Ratzinger?
Yes.
That's important to you.
Oh, very, yeah. One of the things, again, it's only partly rational, but I think is outliving certain people. And I used to think that before I was sick, of course.
Even now you don't mind taking on the Pope? You're not hedging your bets at all?
Not at all, no. In fact, now more than ever. You know, there was a very funny cartoon in the New Yorker a few years ago. It was drawn by Roz Chast, and it's the view over someone's shoulder of a man reading the obituaries page of the New York Times. And the little bubbles all across the page read, same age as me, younger than me, 2 years older than me. So yeah. That is, in fact, what people are thinking after a certain age when they read the obituary page. I'm not exempt from that pettiness, I'm afraid.
You started the memoir...
But I mean, I also did wish to see my children married, yes.
Yeah. You started the memoir after seeing a photo of yourself, and the line underneath it said, the late Christopher Hitchens. Is that right?
Yes.
What about seeing that made you want to write a memoir? I mean, how did seeing yourself described as the late? I mean, this was obviously before your diagnosis.
Well, I was already engaged on the memoir, but I got a frantic letter from the National Portrait Gallery in London saying that an image of me in one of their magazines or catalogues had mistakenly described me as the late Christopher Hitchens. It was transposed, sadly, from the caption that did apply to a friend of mine, whose picture was also in there. And I can just tell you, if you read about yourself in the past tense, it concentrates the mind immediately. And then I thought, well, I've joined a club of people, famously Ernest Hemingway, Mark Twain, Alfred Nobel, I forget who the others are now, who live to see their own obituaries in the newspaper. And it makes you think a lot more about time, about the fact that you're reading a sentence that will one day be printed for real, for sure. I even say in the opening to my book, presumably someone by now has actually written my obituary. Obituaries get written well in advance.
Well, I was going to say, have you written the obituary for Kissinger or Ratzinger?
No. I haven't. I also say in my book that I've done almost everything as a journalist, except be a sports writer, because I don't care about sports, and be a writer of obituaries. I can write after people are dead, but I can't write while they're still alive. My dear friend Edward Said, for example, who died of leukemia, caused me often to be rung up by people saying, we need an obituary for Edward to be ready when he dies. Can you do it? I couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. It's interesting. Strange kind of reserve. I did write something about him when he passed on, as people say.
Right. Part of the book that really resonated with me is you write, and it's in the first chapter, you write about your mom who committed suicide. I have a brother who committed suicide as well, and it's certainly, it's something that unless you've sort of had it touch down in your life, one doesn't really sort of realize the impact it can have. In what kind of an impact did it have on you?
My mother took her own life in a suicide pact with a lover after the failure of her marriage to my father when she was still quite young. And I was terribly upset at the thought that someone as vivacious as her would or could ever get to a point where she would think there was no point in any further life. And that was succeeded by the feeling that I, who was very close to her, should have been able to give her some such reason. And I think I describe, well, I know I do in the book, the awful discovery I made in the hotel in Athens where she took her life, that because it was the old days of switchboards, I went through all the records, she'd made several efforts to call my number in London, and I'd never been at home. And I've never been able to lose the feeling that she was probably calling in the hope of finding a handhold of some sort to cling to, and that if she'd heard my voice, because I could almost always make her laugh, in fact I could invariably make her laugh, however blue she was, that I could have saved her. So as a result, I've never had what people like to call closure. I mean, it's remained an open...
I think that word closure, though, is such a ridiculous word. I mean,
so
it's such a TV word. It's every time I hear it, I feel it's people speak it who have not lost anyone and don't understand that there is no such thing as...
There is no such thing, A, and B, it wouldn't be worth having if
right.
it were available, because all it would mean was that some quite important part of you had gone numb. And you think, oh, how nice, I don't feel anything about her anymore. No.
Actually, I want to read something else that you wrote in... You said, I've been in denial for some time, knowingly burning the candle at both ends and finding that it often gives a lovely light. But for precisely that reason, I can't see myself smiting my brow with shock or hear myself whining about how it's also unfair. I've been taunting the reaper into taking a free scythe in my direction. I have now succumbed to something so predictable and banal that it bores even me. Rage would be beside the point for the same reason. Do you find this boring in a way?
Yes, in fact I sometimes think that's what will kill me.
The mundane nature.
Yeah, having to sit through chemotherapy, for example, is an almost Zen experience of boredom. You can't do much except read. You don't feel great, and you're watching poison go into your arm. People are saying you should be struggling, you're battling cancer. You're not battling it. You couldn't be living a more passive moment than that. You feel as if you're drowning in powerlessness.
But did you never ask that question, why me? Or is it a question you asked and you debated with yourself?
The question comes because you can't, it's not a matter of whether you think such things or not. It's a matter of how you react to them when they occur from your subconscious. You haven't actually thought it. It's just been flung at you. Why me? Well, why not is the best answer to that. It's
a strong way of looking at things, though. I mean, there's no pity involved. There's no self-pity.
Hope not.
That would
self-pity isn't going to help me. But I hope I'd despise it if I thought that it would. Hence the refusal of prayer, which is a form of self-pity and self-indulgence. It's as if the universe is all about you and responds to your entreaties. I hardly think so.
In a moment of doubt, isn't there? I don't know. I just find it fascinating that even when you're alone and no one else is watching, that there might be a moment where you want to hedge your bets.
If that comes, it'll be when I'm very ill, when I'm half demented, either by drugs or by pain, where I won't have control over what I say. I mention this in case you ever hear a rumor later on. Because these things happen, and the faithful love to spread these rumors. On his deathbed, he finally... Well, I can't say that the entity that by then wouldn't be me wouldn't do such a pathetic thing, but I can tell you that not while I'm lucid, no. I can be quite sure of that.
So if there is some story that on your deathbed...
Don't believe it.
Don't believe it.
Don't credit it, no.